Hey, how's it going? My name is Benji, and welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute since I've done an actual interview, and so I'm really excited to actually finally get this out here. We actually filmed this all the way back in December. Sorry it took me a while to get out, but I had a wonderful conversation with one of my favorite ambient artists, Alex Roldan, and we talked about a bunch of really cool stuff. I started wanting to cut it down to a short video, but at the end, it just turned out I just wanted to keep it all in. So here's my interview slash podcast, and I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks to Alex for doing this, and let's get into it. Um, awesome. Well, I'm going to just jump right into this here. If you want to take a second to anybody who may not know who you are, if you just want to introduce yourself.
So my name is Alex Roldan. I am a sound designer by day, I guess, and I dabble in ambient electronic music in between. And yeah, I just like tweaking with that stuff, and not much else. I'm kind of a boring guy outside of that.
Hey, you know what? I'll take it. I'm nice. Very boring as well. So awesome. So so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you specifically, I've actually name dropped you here on the channel before. Wow, so back when I was first kind of getting into making ambient music, when I was first getting pulled in, I came across your YouTube channel. I want to say it was like either late 2019 or something like that. And I really got stuck into what you had made at the time and the record that you had out at the time, Body Image. And I just found it so interesting because it was that sort of thing that I knew that I had been looking for with like an ambient sound. But there were also different things that were like left field, like your use of rhythm and drums and stuff like that. Your textures were very interesting. And now you also just dropped this new record a couple months back, and that's Soft Sill, and that's kind of an extension of all that. So I would just like to talk to you a little bit about like what kind of inspires your sonic identity, because I feel it's very unique. I feel like there's something that really makes what you do sound like what you do. And I'd kind of love to know where that comes from and kind of what makes you do things like that.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's cool that you listen to both of them. I appreciate that.
They're both very good.
I mean, thank you. Yeah, so I think my background, I play drums. That was my first instrument. I picked that up when I was like, I say like 11 years old. My dad played drums, and he kind of like had it shelved away in the basement. He had like this like old Pearl, drum set, and I picked that up, and just got into bands, and it was just kind of whatever like my group of friends played that certain year. So we ended up playing hardcore music, and it was really, really cool. And we got into this kind of section where we kind of had like these like interludes sort of thing, where, we were playing like this really like, hard, heavy song. And then, it was kind of like a trend back then where, you kind of wanted to do like this quick little like clean guitar with like this reverb, and, like the guitarist would be like doing the little like oscillation on the delay pedal. And I always, for some reason, like, and I still have that group of friends and they're amazing. But I think they kept on going down that path, but I was always so intrigued by those little interludes. Like I wanted to just make it longer. I just wanted to be like, hey, let's do more of that, So I ended up picking up like a Boss SP303, and I, set it up next to my drum kit, and I started playing some just some like, ethereal samples and things like that. And it just took me down this rabbit hole of a bunch of things. It was the moment that I was like, hey, I can actually do stuff solo and not really, kind of rely on other people about band practices and, their creative control, even though it was awesome. It's just kind of nice to start like this little side project thing. So I started this little side project in high school. I called it I'm Analog, and I don't know really why I called it that. I don't think I couldn't afford any analog equipment. So I was like, that's cool. It's kind of ironic. Like I don't have any analog gear at the time. So I was like, okay.
It works.
Yeah. So, but that was a really cool experience. I remember like, doing Battle of the Bands, and it was like, it was nerve-wracking because, you're kind of like there, the stage by yourself. You don't have a band, and as a drummer, you're in the back. So you're up in front. I remember, I had a drum kit, and I would have my little sampler, and I picked up like an Elisa synth, and it was very, I don't know, it's just funny thinking back on it. But yeah, so long story short, that sort of got me into kind of where I am today, of just hearing what other people are doing online, which I love, and I respect all the musicians on like Instagram and YouTube and things like that. But I kind of wanted to go back to like my kind of old roots, I guess, and have some rhythm and drums and percussion in it. And because it was a good, like, I'd say between 5 or 10 years, I just didn't touch music at all, because of college, and then my girlfriend and my wife, and it was just I just had other priorities at the time, and so when I picked it back up like years later, I was at a local music shop and picked something up just to fiddle around with it. And yeah, I just want to do something different, and but it wasn't anything that I didn't want to make it like I'm going to do something different. It was just I just always thought that was cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just fun. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's great. And I love how we have very similar things that pulled us into that. That when you were explaining the sort of like hardcore band interlude, I'm like, well, this is a song that I know. Growing up, starting in like a lot of pop punk groups, some emo groups, some of that sort of stuff, definitely like the hardcore groups, and how they all sort of blend in. They all really do want to take that aspect. And I think that's a cool thing about the more modern, like, as opposed to like, 80s, 90s, 80s, early 90s, like hardcore scenes, you get a lot more of that chance to branch out, which exposes a lot of people to this sort of thing, which I just think is cool. That's like my own personal thing, but I think that the Sayasin listener to ambient musician pipeline is a real thing. And
oh yeah.
So I thought
it was a staple. Yeah,
they're incredible. I love them.
Yeah, we've seen him a couple times actually. My wife is obsessed with like Anthony Green.
Yeah,
like obsessed. So like Circus Survive.
He's an incredible vocalist. Love him.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah,
they're great. So, they're fantastic, and that whole like genre, that whole sound that they kind of did, that sort of bridge between emo and metalcore and hardcore, and like all of those different things that they blended together. And Anthony, in his own different bands and projects, has also done. It's very cool to it's one of those things that I think that like I remember like when I was in high school, I was like the only person who knew about that group, because I went to a high school where everyone was listening to actually what I would probably call artistic music, because I went to like an arts high school. So I was like, everyone else was like listening to like jazz, or like, they were like theater kids. And then I was like the one person listening to this, but it was like, it was one of those things where that was just I'm just going off on a tangent here, but I thought that it was they were a very cool band for sort of bringing in a lot of those other influences, and sort of being able to push me sort of while getting deeper into that scene, also push me out to a lot of different scenes, which is just a thing I think is valuable in music in general.
Yeah. I was even going to bring up like, I'm sure you listen to bands like Under Oath and things like that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I remember like, seeing them from like Warped Tour, and like there was always like that corner of the stage. His name was Chris Dudley, the keyboardist. And, he just had like, just like a desk of synths. And I was always like, what is that? And there was always like that like sense of wonder when you're a kid and you're in the pit, but you're looking up at the stage and you don't know what this guy's doing, but it sounds amazing. And like, it's like, what a guitar does, what a drum does, for the most part. And, but you're just like, what the hell is that sound over there? It's crazy, and
Yeah.
that was kind of, another part with like that, Seosin, bands like that. Yeah, really kind of triggered my, my want into, doing this sort of stuff.
Well, and that's interesting. I'm actually gonna kind of dive into a question a little further down, because that actually brings up something kind of interesting. Is what I find really cool about that is I still have that same feeling whenever I see someone performing any type of electronic music, because it's such a diverse like way there's so many ways you can get the same sounds, and there's so many ways you can approach things. And I want to actually ask you, so when I found your stuff, one thing that I found really interesting about it was you tend to use a lot of different pieces of gear and stuff like that. And despite using a bunch of different things, you always have this sort of sonic identity. And it sort of shows that, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's a lot of different ways you can go about creating this. So I kind of want to know, how do you approach like the gear you use? Is it like a right tool for the job, or is it a right job for the tool? Is it, do you think about it at all? Is it, I would love to kind of hear where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And, my room is a revolving door pretty much. There's a lot of times where gear comes in, gear comes out. I kind of implemented this thing for me like a few months ago, about like a half year ago, where I was like, if I get anything else, I want to like give something away. I just kind of want to have this rotating door of just stuff. Cause, I was kind of hoarding things. And I think that was sort of like my mentality back then, where, I'd be online and I see something, I'd be like, oh, that's amazing. And then I'd see what somebody's doing with it. And then I'm like, okay, gotta get that. And then I pick that up. And then there's something else. I'm like, oh, I gotta get that, and it just comes like this huge like cloud of stuff. And it kind of like muddies up my creativity, I guess,
Okay.
And yeah, like actually coming back from drums, I mean, when I was a drummer in the musician friend circle, like I always enjoyed having just like a kick, snare, floor tom, crash, and a hi-hat, like nothing else. I wanted it to be as bare bones, because I thought that was kind of the most like creative I could be at that time, where I have like the less stuff in front of me, and like huge respect to like drummers and things like, Neil Peart, RIP, from Rush. And, he had like these like huge drum set, and he can make any sonic sound possible, but for me, sitting behind a kit like that, it would kind of like, I'd be like, oh, I got everything in front of me. Like you don't really think like that extra layer,
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to like, my ambient stuff, I went back and forth with having like a big case with kind of everything out in front of me, everything synced up, everything MIDI clocked, like the perfect way to route my interface into my computer. I can just got record and I can do anything. And that has its pros, but for me personally, it kind of also had its cons of it didn't spark, like I really do feel like there's a 2-layer thing of making music. And like the one layer is that just on the surface, like this button can do this button can do that. But then when you're limited in a way, you start thinking of just different ways of messing with a piece of gear, so that's why I kind of like, I have, it looks like I have tons of gear, like, but different videos at the same time. But I just like rotating it out. I like, it's kind of one of my like rituals for, I'd say like maybe like a month or so. I'd take my little Eurorack case out and just kind of like, spread everything out and be like, okay, I'm going to try this setup today, so I just put it all in together. And so, when you say stuff like, is the right tool for the job or the right job for the tool? I think it's the right job for the tool. Cause I kind of have, I don't know, I have a pretty, I have a pretty good idea of like what I want to make and like what I want to achieve. But I always like kind of discovering new things, new sounds, new ways that certain pieces of gear can do different things, I guess. So I like, I like small systems, but keep it flexible. And I used to be pretty personally attached to like certain pieces of gear. There'd be something that I'd have and I'd be like, oh, like, but I made that really cool thing that one time, like a year ago, and it was like awesome. But I've learned to kind of let that go. And because I think, I just like trying new things, but at the same time, like not hoarding, not just having this huge amount of stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I definitely, I commend you for that, because currently I'm probably like, 10 steps behind you is what I'd say. Cause I'm at that point right now where I'm very much struggling. Like, I'm like, oh, I want this and I want this and I want this and I want this. And I'm not, but I'm so afraid. Like, I'm holding everything in my arms right now. Like I just can't feel free to give something up, even though, there's plenty of pieces of gear that I can like look over at right now and be like, I haven't touched that in 6 months. And right. I haven't made anything with it in a year and a half. But I really liked the one thing I made, so I'm afraid. So I commend you for being able to sort of let that go and try new things. That's really cool. And that's a thing that I need to work on personally. So with these different pieces of gear that you have and with these different things you do, I know we talked a little bit about how your approach is kind of like finding different things that different pieces of gear can do. And I'd love to listen to you elaborate a little bit on like, how do you actually approach your songwriting? Because especially in the electronic world, in ambient worlds and stuff like that, there's sort of the conversation between like, are there generative elements? Is this totally pre-planned? And sort of how do you go about like when you're looking for a piece of gear, or maybe when you're using a piece of gear, like what are you looking for it to do when you make something?
That's a good question. A lot of times I kind of, so like right now I'm at the desk where I kind of do my full-time job, and I have like my music desk to the side of me. And I kind of just, it's kind of like a creative outlet. It starts out as a creative outlet. It just starts out with, let me see what I can patch just now, or I have like a good idea or something. And I'm just like, I just want to see what would happen if I route this to this, because I've never tried it before. Like, oh, let's try it out. And, a lot of times I just leave stuff like patched and it's just looping for like hours while I'm working or something, and just another thing would spark in me. I'd be like, oh, that's a pretty cool thing. And, I'd go back and I'd try it out. I'd route it through like a tape machine and lower the tape speed or something, like, oh, like that's even cooler, and things like that. And it kind of branches out from there. Sometimes it just stays like that. Sometimes I just have it playing in the background, and then at the end of the day I'm like, okay, that was done, and I turn it off. I don't record it, I don't do anything. Sometimes like I really enjoy the Instagram side of it, because that's kind of where I first quote unquote got like started out. Before I started posting stuff on Instagram, I made music, but I was super like critical of it. I'd make something and I'd post it on my SoundCloud or something, and I would just be like, that's not good enough, and I delete it, and it was just always that. It was always like, this isn't good enough, or I want to work on this more, so I'd remove it. And I'd have like, if you look at like my like private SoundCloud, I probably have things from like 2017 where it's like V1, V2, like V2 Rev, V3, like all that stuff. And it just, I don't know when I think it was like the beginning of a new year. I just had a thing where I was just like, I'm just going to post whatever. I'm going to post it, whatever, just screw it. I'm just going to do it, And so that mentality has stuck with me ever since. And so, a lot of times the things that I post on Instagram, there's always something where I'm like, oh, like I should have done that. I could have done this. but I go back to my roots and be like, no, I'm gonna post it because, I realized that no matter what, no matter how many revs I do, no matter how many times I tweak something, like whatever I post today in like 2022, 2023, I'm going to look back at it and be like, oh, well, I'm better than what I was then. So it's like, no matter how hard I tweak it, I'm always going to feel like that, And so when you kind of have that approach, like I don't even know when I started posting, like, I don't know. I forgot what year it was, but when I go back to that, I'm not as critical on myself because I knew back then that I was just super open and being like, yeah, maybe I didn't do anything quote unquote, like technically right or whatever. There's like probably like ground hum in the line and it sounds like really just, disgusting and things like that. But just like looking back at that, I'd be like, like that's what I was doing at that point in time in my life. And I kind of like those snapshots. That's what I use Instagram for. It's just kind of like, a snapshot of, kind of where my creativity is and it kind of ramps up,
I like that. I like that. I like that way of describing it as a snapshot. So I'm guessing then that when you're sort of doing something, I'm guessing then that there's sort of a separation between when you're making something for an Instagram post versus making something and looking to actually release it. Then, like you're sort of in different creative spots, or does anything that you make like that you're like, oh, I'm going to post this. Do you ever go back to that stuff, or do you kind of know in the moment, like, I'm going to save this, I'm going to pocket this? So kind of how does that work for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. It definitely varies. It's not super black and white about it. The past like year or so, my kind of workflow and like making videos have been like kind of recording everything. So usually 8 times out of 10, I'd say I have like a longer version of what I post on Instagram. Whether that's just like, the same loop, just, minutes, for a few minutes, or, I kind of build upon it. I'm also not trained in music anyway. So there's a lot of parts like that I record where I like hit the wrong key and it's like completely nasty dissonant. And I'm like, ooh, they're like, no, let's cut that out.
I'm just letting you know, I've spent years in music training. It happens anyway. Like, don't worry. So like, whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes those are cool, but 9 times out of 10, it just sounds like complete doo-doo when you hit like the wrong key. Yeah, I mean, so like, for example, my last 2 albums, so for Body Image, I think mostly all of it stemmed from a video one way or another. And they kind of evolved like way different. Like, the ones with drums. So I had my good friend, Robbie Gonzalez. Like I play drums, but I've always wanted to do a collaboration with him. Mm-hmm. And I just love his drum sound and everything. He's a really great friend. So he tracked drums for these 2 songs that they just started out as just loops, just these little, things that I made. And it was kind of hard because my one song, We Keep, it was when I was recording like everything mono because I didn't know how to like post stuff on Instagram, like, stereo yet. So that one I went back to that video because I really like the feel of it. And this is like, I usually don't do this. That was kind of like a one-off. I really like the feel of it. So I went back and I was like, I kind of recreated the patch. I had the main synth line saved on my OP1, and I really liked something, just resonated with me about it. And with me not knowing anything about music theory or whatever, like my song structure is pretty crappy. So it's a very fine line between like, just feeling like I'm just putting stuff on top of loops and it's just kind of like going up and then it kind of like goes down for the outro, and there's a lot of times where I get stuck in that, and I'm, it's still what I'm trying to work on to this day. I'm just, just trying to make it a little bit more interesting. But with that song, I kind of had an idea in my head and I'm like, okay, I'm going to hit up Robbie. We'll see what we can do with this song. And yeah, it was great. It was really cool. So a lot of body image started out as just like a single loop or something. And yeah, it was cool. I haven't gone back to that workflow yet. Actually, for my next album, whenever I release this thing, I've kind of got that same idea. I kind of have like a saved like Pro Tools file of just like, like tracks I just want to revisit. And even if I'm not going to use that particular track, I'm like, try that patching again. Like there was this one I'm working on right now where I did something like really just, I don't know, I was just, and it's one of those things, I don't know if you ever get this, but like you make something and you're like, I'm never going to make something that's cool again. This is awesome. This is so cool.
Very often, and then, very often. Yeah. And it's recording.
Yeah. It's just like one of those things where, you patch, you're like, oh, this is amazing. And then the next day, like, you don't know how to play keyboard, So it's like, that's why I love those notes of just being like, okay, like on that patch, try this again, but, maybe in like a different light, and sometimes, it works really, really cool. It works really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then Soft Sill was like completely different. Soft Sill was literally, so it's interesting. Just piggyback what you said like way earlier, how you're saying that you felt like Soft Sill is like an extension of body image. That's really cool to hear, because I was not thinking this like consciously, but the way that body image ended, I really liked how it ended on like a very heavy note. And it was something, and I was very, worried about doing a song like that, because, and also like the guy that I go to mastering, his name's Taylor Dupree, and he does like very like delicate ambient works. Like he works with Marcus Fisher. He has his own record label. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, he's great. I'm going to just hijack a very tiny tangent. One of my greatest things. So I actually hadn't found out about Marcus Fisher until early 2020. And the reason I found out is because of the Div Kid video, where he like kind of went through his like setup that he's doing and everything. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. And I looked him up, and not the day before, he had been in my town at the college that was like 2 minutes down the road doing a performance. And then of course the next week everything shut down, and I was just putting my head through the wall. Oh, man. So anyways, continue what you were saying though. So yes, I'm very familiar with that with both of them, I believe. At least I definitely know Marcus, and I believe you said that was Taylor Dupree.
Yeah, Taylor Dupree.
Yeah. Definitely familiar with him as well.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, they're amazing musicians, but they're super. Taylor's very like just intricate, very quiet, very just super like high detail. And I wasn't at the time, and I was just like, hey, here's like this, recording that I did. And, I knew it was like super phasey. It was, it was a really crappy audio recording, to be honest.
Whatever that worked,
whatever. Yeah. So I was nervous about that, but I loved how it came out and how he made it sound very big. It sounded way more huge than it, originally did. So I like how Soft Sill is kind of like it's like one big breath. Like after my first album, it's just like, and it's just like one big like exhale, down to the end.
It really is. And I just want to again take a second to say, like, I definitely very much agree with what you said. It does sort of take that. It keeps the sonic identity with a lot of stuff that was on that first record, but it is very much that darker, heavier, but still like, I think the first record feels to me a lot more of it feels a lot more, melodic to a point, a lot more structured. It has a little bit more of that, but it does really feel like everything that record built up to, then just sort of like, it feels like when a motorboat goes by and the water is just kind of churning, and so it's like it's still there. You still have that. You still have the impact that was left from it, and sometimes that's just as interesting, if not more interesting, than the actual inciting incident, just depending on what happens. So, it's very, very cool, very interesting, and I just think that it's cool how you. I think it is kind of funny how you're like, I didn't even, I to a point you're like, I didn't even notice it's, which just shows like, how interesting of a voice you actually have through your instruments and how recognizable that is. So as a thing that you're like, oh, this is like, a thing that you mentioned, you're like, this is, a little bit of like a personal thing, not starting doing this because of like, any grand ambition or anything, and yet still it has such a nice texture to it. Anyways, I don't know what you were saying, and I'm sure I cut you off.
No, yeah. No, it's all good. No, thank you. I mean, yeah, that's exactly, like Soft Still, it's kind of it's a weird album for me, to be honest, because I was talking with David from Mystery Circles, you know that record label?
Not off the top of my head, but I probably know some of the artists on it.
Okay, yeah. So they're the ones he's just one guy, but he's the one who released Body Image.
Okay, and, cool.
Him and I have a great relationship, and, he was like, hey, for your second one, just like, hit me up. And I was totally down for it and everything, to release it with like a cassette and everything like that. But it just got, I don't know, it just got to a point where Soft Still just started feeling more like that breath. It was more like an interlude sort of. I don't like that word for some reason, but just like, it's like an in-between album. And I didn't want to make it too big of a deal. I didn't want to release like a physical, I was thinking about it for a long time, and it was just kind of sitting on a shelf for a while. And I just decided, I was just like, I kind of want this album to be very low key. I didn't really promote it that much. I didn't, on like Bandcamp Friday, I think I like promoted it like once, and it's not that type of album to me for some reason. It's not an album where I want to like promote it. I think it's just, it's just this in between, which, has its pros and cons, because I think when I tell that to people, it's kind of like, oh, well, you should treat it like any other piece of music. But with me internally, like that just kind of felt like, just, and I think that also had to do with like when I was making that album, it was like, I think there's like a string of like 3 of the songs where I made those songs in like a span of like just like a couple hours. Mm-hmm. Because my wife was pregnant at the time, and I remember it pretty vividly, just like sitting in our old dining room, and that's kind of where I make a lot of my old videos. We actually moved since then, but making videos on that dining room table, and she was just kind of like hanging out on the couch, just reading her book, and I just had just a very small. I think it was the OP1, this reverb, the BAM. And the Ciet Lombard Coco Quantus, and just those 3. And I was just, going back to like what I was saying before, where like in between work, I just kind of like make, loops and crap, and then just kind of like play it for hours. That was kind of the same thing with Soft Still, but I just kind of like just clicked record on my Zoom and just kind of like had it going. So, there's a lot of things that happen between those songs, but I kind of want just like to chop it up and like take those instances. And so for me, like that whole album just feels like just me just like hanging out in my living room, and just like not thinking too much about it. And I think that it's a lot more of a personal album for me, just because I didn't feel like I just wanted to like promote it. Like I love that it's like up on streaming, and I love that it's up on Bandcamp for people to listen and share. But yeah, I don't know. It was a different approach,
Absolutely.
Which I enjoyed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And, I'll say that if this is an in-between album, can't wait to see what the other end of it is. I do think that that's valuable, sometimes, and I understand that struggle sometimes with putting a lot of yourself into something and not exactly being, necessarily being comfortable pushing it, monetizing it, any sort of thing like that. And just, and more you just kind of want to get it out there and have it be there and just let it live its own life. So I definitely feel that.
Yeah, especially like, from the old Instagram days of just being like, I'm just going to post it, whatever. I have a very hard time promoting my stuff like that. Especially for any sort of like monetary value. I don't know. There's something that, I want to build this more into being more than, what I do now and things like that. I just have a really hard time like getting to that point where it's like, hey, this is up on Bandcamp, like $6.
It's hard. It's hard as hell. Yeah. I mean, having, it's one of those things that's just like always going to be weird because you don't want to feel and I think this is a thing that just as musicians we're really sensitive to, because we've all been in a situation where someone's like, you do music, I do music, and then they just start going off and pitching everything that they've ever done, and you just never want to be that person, and so you end up overcorrecting. And I mean, it's a thing that like I've talked with many people about, where they're like, no, like just tell people what you do and like what you enjoy. I'm like, you don't get it. There's a person who's there's a person who I'm thinking of right now who I don't want to be, and nobody else is going to understand this but me right now. So
exactly. So it's funny. I mean, I was making coffee with my wife this morning, and she was like, don't forget to like promote your stuff on this interview. And I'm like, I don't want to. I just want to talk. I just want to chat.
And I mean, that's valuable. I think that I think that's valuable, and I think that there's a really, I mean, that's a thing that I see a lot with a lot of different artists, and kind of what it comes down to is your own personality and your own personal level of comfort, because as important as promotion is to a smaller artist, and as important as, if you're trying to make a living off of it, or if you want to get some sort of income off of it, that's what you have to do. There's also, I mean, you do kind of, I don't blame anybody for taking time and stepping back and saying, it's not for me right now. It's just, I just want to do something to do something. And so, I very much respect that. I'm gonna turn a little bit from the more heady talks about like inspiration and creativity, and I want to talk a little bit more specifically on the gear you use, because I think that definitely some things that like that's one of the things that drew me to what you did. I love your use of smaller modular systems. I definitely spent hours like pausing frames and trying to figure out what the heck an ER301 was, and like, try to figure something else like that for my own little setups. And I just think the way you use some things is really interesting. I love how large you make the OP1 sound, because that's always a thing that a lot of people, including myself, sometimes have difficulties with, is sometimes it feels like this tiny thing, because you don't want to treat this like it's a huge thing. You don't want to, you just think, oh, this is small. It just makes small things. So I would love to kind of, talk a little bit about, hardware, talk a little bit about gear. I'd love to kind of know where you balance hardware versus software, if there is a balance. I mean, pretty much everything I see from you is hardware. And so I'd just kind of love to know kind of how you go about things like that,
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'll start off with the hardware and software sort of thing. So for my full-time job, I would use Pro Tools like daily, from like literally 5 days a week, Monday, Friday. I'm in front of a computer editing voices, editing music. It's just, it's more of like a job for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of one thing that, attracted me to actual like out of the box, hardware, because I'm staring at a screen all day, doing like audio, not music per se. I edit podcasts for a living.
Okay.
So I'm just listening to voice, dialogue, editing, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so I only use the DAW with my music stuff just for syncing up my video and, just a little bit of sweetening. I don't do much. Like, I have, plugins and stuff that I use sometimes, but usually, it's just all hardware.
Just a little bit of compression, a little limiting on the end sort of thing.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But anything like super creative, like, before I started posting a lot, like I really like the Sound Toys stuff and things like that, like did the effects in the box, and it was really cool. But yeah, I've just really gravitated towards like tactile, on the surface, I can see what I'm doing sort of thing. And, it's nice. And it's nice. It's a good separation between work and whatever I call this, just like, hobby. Yeah. So a lot of the things that I have now, since I have like smaller systems, I do like having things that can do so many things at once. And I've had conversations before with other modular or just ambient musicians, where they like the opposite. They kind of like this one module to do this one thing and this to do this other thing. And, and I like that too. But, a lot of my core pieces, like the 301, the OP1, the Octatrack, like the Electron boxes and stuff, I can use that for so many ways. And those are the things that kind of stick in my setup. And then I feel like talking about before, that kind of rotating door of stuff that not necessarily like, I don't want to call them like a one trick pony, but I get them in the studio. And if I don't vibe with it within like a few weeks, I'm pretty easy just to be like, okay, this isn't vibing with me. I'm just gonna, let it go. So yeah, but there's a lot of times where I enjoy going to one module that does a lot, like the 301, for example. And sometimes I just use it. I mean, I actually, as lame as it sounds, I love using it as just like a mixer.
Yeah.
Because I can do a lot of like, yeah.
There's a lot of value in
really
just
cool.
a good mixer and just using that utility. I mean, that's a thing that I learned probably in the past like 2 years, like starting to produce my own stuff at home. Like there's really nothing that can separate, like, that's almost as creative a tool as to whatever you're plugging into it. So I very much agree there.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, and yeah, I mean, I've been thinking of just getting another like one of those little pods and just putting the 301 in that and just kind of having that, because I have that, I don't know where it's at, but I have it for my Hermod, that little MIDI sequencer.
Yeah.
I just have it in a pod now. So I can just kind of bring it around my room and I can plug into my computer if I want to like, transfer, anything like MIDI wise to save. Cause I do that sometimes. Like if I really like a sequence or something, I just save it to my machine. I don't really play anything in the computer, but it's just a good like backup for me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so, maybe putting it into its little box would be nice. But and even going back, you're saying that Div Kid Marcus Fisher video, I remember watching that and seeing how he did like, the granular, buffer thing. And I was like, damn, that's really cool. So, I kind of have boxes that can do, just a lot of stuff, which is nice, and sometimes I just use it as a simple in-out mixer. Sometimes I use it as like a granular processor. Sometimes I play loops on it. Sometimes I use it as like, I've used it as like the built-in recorder, so if like something's cool and like I don't have anything set up to record, I'm like, I'll just switch it on and set it up like that. Yeah, but in terms of like the sound, like the OP1 is I think there's only certain sounds I can personally do with it that I really truly like enjoy and like can make it sound like big. Yeah, it's hard,
it's a unique of like piece of gear. Yeah.
And I love it. I mean, and to be honest, it's been on like the chopping block of like rotating for a real long time, but like I always come back to it because it's a nice I call it like a creation station sort of. It's just like this little thing where you can just kind of like plug it in. You can play it by by itself. It's battery powered. You can just kind of sit on the couch with it, mix some, whatever. And go back to my room, plug it in, put it into, some modules. And another thing that like I think I use way too much is reverb. Like almost like
Never enough.
every post. Yeah, I know. Almost like every post I do, I'm like, don't drown in a reverb, don't drown in a reverb. And then I listen to the
So
final,
fun.
it's like, yeah, it's like huge.
So fun.
It always happens. It is. It's so fun.
It's great.
Yeah, it'd be like stuff where like I'd be like, oh, this is cool, but what if I put on the reverb? And it's like, okay, that's even cooler. So, and it does. It thickens things up a lot, which I like. And like I really enjoy like the analog heat from Electron. That's kind of like my end of chain. And that kind of like, I feel like that really like glues everything together, which is nice.
I've been trying to find
I had an
a
issue
here that does that actually. So
Yeah.
it's in between the heat and the balm. Those are kind of the coin I'm flipping right now.
I was working with those two. I think the thing that took me over to the heat was the way that it can be a USB interface. So I can use my iPad through it. And there's some insane iPad apps now. It's crazy.
There are.
Yeah, it's like a mini computer.
I've like not even I have one of the new fancy or not sorry, I don't have one of the M1 iPads, but I have like the one that came out right before it, and I'm just like, oh, there's so much that this can do. And it's like it's hard for me because I'm like, man, I don't want to have two DAWs, but also I mean like two DAW. I don't want to have like two different like workstations in that same sort of way, but I'm like, shit, there's so much I can do.
Right. Yeah.
So.
But I mean, that being said, if you're just looking for like a warming processor, like the Boom or the Baum or whatever, it's like that's a really great piece of gear too. I mean, I love that company. I love how like simple it is, really. I mean, I just like how there's only a few buttons with a few algorithms and you kind of tweak it right on the spot. I love that too. I've kind of, minus a few pieces of gear, like the 301, the Octatrack, maybe the Norns a little bit. Like I really don't like menu diving all that much. I just kind of like just sticking straight to it. But yeah, so I love just kind of like how those boxes are just like, 7 buttons. And like, that's pretty much it, I
love that. I mean, like that's the thing that really like you kind of have to make a compromise with a piece of gear is you either need to make it super deep and you sacrifice, like with a small piece of gear, it's either super deep and you sacrifice usability, or it's not as deep, but it's incredibly tweakable. And that's actually one of the reasons why, because I've definitely been in that same spot with you as you with the OP1, where you kind of go like, is this important? And it also helps that you're like, man, I could almost get my money back just selling this thing, like because their value is pretty decent. But the thing that they really to me found like a really good balance of that menu diving versus creativity, like the keyboard shortcuts for like how easy it is to record something and then immediately reverse it and slow it to half speed. Like I'm like,
right,
that's 2 buttons and it's great.
Exactly.
So like
exactly,
it's very valuable with that sort of thing.
And I always have like a huge respect for companies that do firmware updates like years down the road. And they did that one, I forgot when it was, but
a couple months back, and now it's an audio interface.
Yeah, the audio, it's just like, that's amazing. It's so cool.
Great.
It's like nobody, I mean, I know that they sure, it's a business, so they have to like, keep things churning, but it's cool as like a consumer to see something that came out like, how long ago was it? Like
almost 10 years.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they had the 10-year anniversary. Yeah.
It's insane.
There's a 10-year thing.
It's insane.
Yeah. And I was like, they're still doing that stuff. And, I appreciate that about them and Electron. And, it's just like, they're just cool machines that, it feels like they just keep getting better, and which is insane. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I've almost taken an hour. I just want to see if there's anything that I didn't really touch on. I would love to just, take a second to, this is just going to be more of a personal thing. I know you've talked patching. You keep saying patching. When you say that, are you speaking more like, are you more like when you say patching, are you like just saying like patches on gear, or is like the modular kind of where you start off from with a lot of things?
I think the modular is definitely the center of my like of the start of anything kind of creative with me. Like there are some things that I tuck it away. But yeah, usually when I say patching, like I'm usually, even if it's something simple like routing it through the 301 or
Yeah.
just putting it through like a really small like morphogene patch or something like that. Yeah, I do use that a lot. Yeah. And
Cool.
even
Awesome.
like, yeah, it's kind of like what I really like about like having such like a, and I know a lot of people do this, but like, a very fluid, like modular case, I was gonna say box, but case, is that, it's like you can, it's always changing. It's always, and it's nice to kind of put stuff that you're very familiar with into things that you're not, because it opens up more things, if that makes sense. So, it's like, the OP1, perfect example. I feel like I don't feel like I've like mastered that thing yet, but I feel like I've kind of sucked out as much as I could with that box that like I want to get out of it, like maybe like a techno artist or somebody that does different music than me, they have different uses for it and stuff that like, I have no idea what that thing does. But when I put the OP1 through something that's kind of new and fresh and something that like I'm still kind of like stumbling to learn, then it sparks my creativity again with the OP1 about something else, so I always make it a point to at least try like patching like things in the modular, no matter what it is.
That's awesome. I'm curious as to sort of how you build. I know you say a lot of things sort of switch around. Are there any things, obviously the 301 shows up a lot. Are there any things that are like really to you like the heart of the modular? Because I know for me, like what for my very small palette case, the thing that has like been the consistent thing and the thing that's always the most creative thing is the Mutable Marbles, just because of kind of what it does is while not 100% unique, I think that it has a, the way it does it is unique. And to me, like that is the sound of my modular, is this machine that makes no sound. And so I'm curious as to like for you, like kind of what those pieces are, what those staples are for you that are like, really what you were looking for when you built your machine, and sort of like what things you think make the most sense for that.
Oh yeah. I definitely say, and you just want to stick with modular. Like,
I mean, you can talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, like outside of the modular, the past like for a while now, actually, the end of chain, I don't really have it like in my videos anymore. But I have everything kind of routed through the Octatrack now. And that's just kind of like to sample things, create loops, and I can export that like outside. I love that. But within modular, so my very first module was the Morphogene by Make Noise. Because when I got into Eurorack, I was like, oh well, I can kind of base this just around like an effects box. I can just do like a little skiff and get some effects on it, maybe get some Morphogene, get maybe like a reverb in there. I didn't really know like anything about Eurorack at the time. I was just like, oh, like this looks really cool, So I think that has kind of like shaped my sound over the past, since I've been doing this, as a Morphogene is kind of having some sort of like weird, like unsynced loops in the background of just kind of like doesn't really make any sense. So I always love having that. I don't have that in every patch, but that's like a core thing. I definitely say the 301 just because it can do like when I stumbled upon the 301, it just blew my mind because it was just everything that I kind of wanted in Eurorack. It was just, all in one box. I could do so many things with it. And it was at a time where like I really was getting into like that versatility side of Eurorack. It was something that like, I can get a smaller box, but I could do what, 6 modules used to do, I could just do it in like this one little thing. And, there's like menu diving, and it takes a while to set up and all that. But, it's just one of those things that it's always in a core of my setup because it can just do so much. So it's always just there, just doing something. I love marbles. Marbles is amazing. It's just, like you said, it could just do so much. It's just a great, like, it's a really good like idea tool too. You can just kind of like sequence something and you're just like, oh, that's really cool. So yeah, I'd say those three things, because the marbles is one of those modules where I wasn't really vibing with it at first when I first got it. I've had it for a while now. But yeah, I started doing this, like if something like if I'm kind of like getting bored with like a piece of gear or setup, what I usually do is that I either go on YouTube, look at like a review or like somebody like, messing with it. It's like a hard to set up, or just even go to the manual. I just go to the Mutable manual and I just read it and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that,
Yeah.
and like, usually I figure something out where I just didn't know. And, I sit down and mess with it. And if I still don't gel with it, it's gone. But, a lot of times, the stuff that I still have around, it's just because I really just, I learn, new things with it. It's a good, like creative, the modular is like a super creative box, you can just kind of do anything with, really. It's awesome.
Yeah. Honestly. And yeah, I second everything you said. I think that, and definitely like that is like a great thing to do, is like, if you are having, if you need that spark of creativity, just look it up on YouTube sometimes, and like just straight up like scroll down like 3 videos and just see like somebody's doing something, and you'll find some like wild stuff. I mean, that's how I know that's a thing I've done with I use the marbles for like 8 months, and then I realized that there were different scales already in the marbles, and I was like, wait, what?
Right.
And it's like, so oh cool. Wow, it's like there's just like, and before you even go into like, you could use your own scale, you could save your own scales in it, you can do a whole bunch of weird stuff. It's great. It's very cool, very flexible. And so definitely like that's a great little recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, before I let you go, I will make you do the thing that your wife told you to do. If you want to promo anything, say anything before we head out here.
Yeah. Be sure to, check out my Instagram. I like Instagram is like it's a great place to like meet new people. And I met you there. It's nice to, find new musicians, and so, check me out. It's my name, Alex Roldan. I do have music up on Bandcamp. You can check that out there. Yeah, and there'll be stuff coming soon. I want to start kind of shifting from, making a lot of videos to making actually like more music. And that's kind of something that I'm still working on, is, going from 1-minute loops to, songs that I want to share with everybody. So but yeah, that's coming soon for sure.
Thank you so much for spending the time to talk with me. And yeah, I will talk to you sometime in the future.
Perfect. Sounds good, man.
All right. Yeah.
Thanks so much for watching. This was a super fun chat. Thanks again to Alex, not only for doing the interview, but for also your patience with me taking my sweet time getting it done. That was really kind of you on all fronts. I really want to give also a shout out to all of the people who are in my Discord for being super patient with me, kind of being less focused on videos and more focused on live streams. I recently got a new job, which is why it took me forever to get this video out, because adjusting to a new job is its own big old can of worms. So super big shout out to everybody who's been patient with me through that. Thanks to everybody who made it through the video. I mean, it was a longer one, but it was a lot of fun. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave us a comment if you had any questions, or if you just felt like saying something. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more ambient-related content, and hit the notification bell if you want to get notifications every time I go live or post another video. All of Alex's music and socials are linked in the description, and my music and socials and all other ways you can contact me are also linked in the description, so that's the best way to reach both of us. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.